お時間になりましたので始めさせていただきます。本日はお忙しい中、ライムライトネットワークスのウェビナーにご参加いただきまして誠にありがとうございます。司会進行を務めさせていただきますマーケティングを担当しております吉川と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。本日は45分間のウェビナーとなりますが、最後までお付き合いいただけますと幸いでございます。弊社は昨年、世界初の JS ベースエッジのオールインワンジャムスタックプラットフォームレイヤー0の買収を完了させ、弊社のグローバルプライベートエッジキャッシングネットワーク上での、提供を開始いたしました。レイヤー0はウェブサイトのトラフィック、コンバージョン、収益の向上をリアルに実現できる上、開発者の生産性をさらに上げることができます。本日は従来の CDN の問題点を解説するとともに、レイヤー0がどのようにして1秒未満のウェブサイトの表示速度、2倍の開発スピード、そして万全なセキュリティを一つのプラットフォーム上で実現できるかについて、ライムライト米国本社製品担当 VP のイシャンよりご紹介いたします。本ウェビナーでは皆様に確かな情報をお伝えするため、プレゼンテーションを事前に録画し、あらかじめ字幕をつけ、再生スピードを1割落としたビデオをお流しいたします。また、デモのビデオ内ですね、文字が一部見づらい箇所がございます。詳細をご確認されたい場合は、リアルタイムのクリアなデモをお見せできますので、ご遠慮なさらずアンケートにご希望をお書き込みください。また、セッション最後に Q&A がございます。Q&A に関しましては、イシャン本人より回答させていただきます。ご質問は弊社の技術担当のサポートにより通訳いたしますので、ご遠慮なさらず日本語でご質問を書き込んでください。セッションの途中にご質問をご記入いただいても結構です。それでは、業界初一つのプラットフォームでウェブサイトの速い、簡単、強いを実現のウェビナーを始めさせていただきます。この20年間 CDN の速度が変化していない問題点を解説しながら、イシャンが技術者視点でご紹介いたします。始める前にイシャンから一言ご挨拶をさせていただきます。イシャン、please say hi to Japanese customers.
Hi everyone, I'm Ishan Anand, Vice President of Product at Limelight. I'm really excited to talk to you here today, despite the language barrier, and I hope this webinar gives you a new way to look at the CDN and that there's a lot of innovation that can make your site faster thanks to these technologies that are emerging.
はい、ありがとうございます。それでは始めさせていただきます。
My name is Ishan Nand. I'm VP of Product at Limelight. I manage the Layer 0 product. Prior to Layer 0's acquisition by Limelight, I was the CTO at Layer 0. And I'm excited to talk to you all today. And I hope you find today's discussion both provocative and useful. My objective is to give you a new lens at how you look at the CDN, the Content Delivery Network, that piece of your stack that you assume you need to have, but maybe don't think a lot about. And I want you to start asking yourself every time your team is dealing with it, or actually every time you load your website, ask, is your CDN helping you load that website quickly? Is it helping your team move faster? Or is it actually getting in the way of both of those objectives? And the struggle with CDNs is real. Despite having CDNs for really more than 2 decades, the web is not getting any faster. And in fact, by some metrics, it's getting slower. You can see some headlines here on the left. Here on the right are some graphs from actually a report from the well-known Nielsen Norman UX UI group. And they put up this report, speed 23 years later. And what you're seeing here is at the upper right, this is for desktop. This solid blue line is the average connection speed. And you see people are, connections are getting a lot faster, right? But this dotted line is page load time. It is not really changing much. It's actually staying the same. And that's on desktop. And you look on mobile, it's even worse. The mobile connectivity is getting better, but mobile page load times are actually getting worse. They're either staying steady or getting worse. Despite having faster phones and faster bandwidth, things are actually getting worse. And the unfortunate catch-22 is that page speed now matters more than it ever has. It's fairly common knowledge. A faster site means better engagement, so lower bounce rate or higher conversion rate. But that's for people who are already on your website. What's changed now is that Google has rolled out these new metrics called Core Vitals. Those metrics are largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. And it's more important than what the metrics are is their impact. Google is now ranking your site on the search engine results page based on how you perform according to these three metrics. This is very different. Previously, page speed was about improving metrics for people who are already on your website, something like a conversion rate. But now page speed means growth. It means attracting new visitors who have yet to visit your site. This kind of puts, page speed initiatives almost overlapping to that same bucket in how you think of something like, Facebook ads, things that are going to drive users to your website. And the real rub here, though, is that SEO is a zero-sum game. There's only 10 spots in that first 10 blue links on Google search results page. So if you're moving up in rankings, someone else has to move down. So that means, if you're using this type of method to grow traffic, you're either stealing page traffic from your competitors or they're doing it to you. And so with all this importance on page speed, there are really three key impacts. The first challenge is for your development team. It turns out your development team can't actually make best use of the CDN to make their site faster. And that's because CDNs were not built to be used by developers. So to make this concrete, I want you to consider your classic web development stack. You've got, say, a version of your database. If I'm, developing code locally and I'm a developer, I've got a version of my database running locally. I've got a version of my server code, my application server running locally, and I've got a version of my browser that I obviously use for testing. And if I'm making a change, I can test that locally. I can check that in. It then goes through, maybe a peer review. It goes through a QA process. It goes through staging, and it goes to production. And throughout the entire process, I have confidence, increasing confidence in what gets rolled out as it gets rolled out to production because it goes through the software development lifecycle. This is something we, in the DevOps field, they call it shifting left. It means you find changes or issues or bugs, in staging before they go into production, in QA before they hit staging, and local development before you check it in. Unfortunately, the CDN is the one piece of this stack where that doesn't happen. The CDN, your edge, only comes into production. And this is because, the CDN was really the very first piece of the stack that was cloud native, that was born in the cloud. It's a collection of servers around the globe. And so it wasn't integrated into the development process. And so that means that developers really can't develop against it the way they do any other component of the stack. And this is something we wouldn't accept for any of the other components. I want you to imagine you're a developer and I told you you're making a database schema change, but you can't test that locally. The only way you're able to test the database code and the server code that's going to talk to it and the browser API that's going to talk to that is in production. You got to change all three and make sure they all work. And you can only try it out once it's live in production. That's crazy. We wouldn't accept it because it's extremely brittle to dev or test in production. But that's what we accept when it comes to the edge. And as a result, it becomes really underutilized by developers. The other problem is that teams can't see what's working and what's not. They lack the data to know where their website is slow and where it's fast so they can efficiently spend resources where it matters. Because otherwise, focusing on speed is really a drain on your feature and development velocity. And teams may have observability tools, but these are often hard for development teams to use. They may not have access to them, or it may lack the combination of front-end and back-end data you need in order to diagnose performance problems effectively. A good example is Core Web Vitals, which we talked about earlier, which is so critical to understanding your site's ranking. Unfortunately, Google's tools will tell you where you stand, but they have a lag that takes days to weeks to know the impact of an improvement or change when you roll it out. That makes it extremely challenging to iterate and improve your page speed without some form of a third-party tool filling in that gap. And then finally, this has the end result of a really slow site for users. That hurts engagement, that hurts conversion, and now it allows competitors to come in and steal traffic from you. So how did we get here? Well, there's something really fundamental that's going on, and to understand it, we have to step back and review the architecture of how a CDN works. And this model really hasn't changed in basically 20 years. You've got the user here on the right. They make a request from their browser. The browser checks its browser cache, and then it goes out to CDN points of presence. These are servers distributed all across the globe that have various components of the page stored or cached in those servers. And if it has the result in that cache, it'll send it back. If it doesn't, it has to go to the origin server and then the database and then make the journey all the way back to the user. Now, you can make this trip a lot faster if this data is already in the cache and if this point of presence is close to the user. So the key lesson here is that a CDN has really two very simple objectives in order for this model to actually be effective. In order for this extra hop we've added not to just simply be sitting there and adding delay, it needs to be serving data from the edge as close to the user as possible and as often as possible. Unfortunately, today's CDNs are falling short in both dimensions. When we talk about getting as close to the user as possible, today's CDNs think their job stops at the pop. And that makes intuitive sense because that's all the hardware that's really under the CDN's control. But it turns out, with today's technologies and the right combination of software, you can actually get closer and you can turn the browser itself into an extension of the POP network. We'll talk a little bit more about how that's possible. And then on the left, when we talk about getting as often as possible in terms of serving data from the edge, this is what we often refer to as the cache hit ratio. And unfortunately, today's CDNs neglect caching the dynamic HTML and API data that's making your site slow. See, conventional CDNs were really built for how websites were built 20 years ago, when they were mostly HTML with a sprinkle of JavaScript and some images. And so they're really good at caching static assets. So that's your images, your CSS, and your JavaScript assets, the things that never change. But if you actually try to cache the HTML or the API data, which is what your users are actually waiting for, the very first request they make is for the HTML. That is seldom cached. We have actually crawled the web. We did this in the IR 500 and looked at the cache hit rate, and we found that basically around, well, a lot of people are doing a great job on their static assets. They're doing a terrible job on their page URLs. Obviously, with Layer 0 and Edge.js, which we'll talk about in a bit, we improved that. But the key lesson here is if you try to make dynamic data caching work, you need to be able to tell the CDN what's cacheable and what's not based on your application logic. That's why these pages typically don't get cached, because it really depends on how your app works. Well, your front-end developer or your full-stack developer or your web developer is really the person who's best placed to understand what is cacheable and what's not. But unfortunately, as we talked about before, that developer has no way to really inform the CDN what is cacheable, let alone test and verify and have faith in those rules once they roll them out into production. And in fact, a whole movement has arisen called static sites or Jamstack sites that's really about solving this problem. And the whole goal of this movement is really to serve data from the edge, that HTML page from the edge as much as possible. There was a famous debate between Matt Billman, who coined this term Jamstack, and some other luminaries in the field, including the creator of Automatic, whose WordPress platform runs, 40% of the internet. And Matt's key claim was he did the same analysis we did, which is I've run the benchmarks and nobody is caching their HTML at the edge. They cache their JavaScript, they cache their images, but they're not caching their HTML. Unfortunately, these Jamstack and static techniques are made with sites that have very few numbers of pages or on very specific frameworks. So unfortunately, it's not applicable to large enterprise sites that aren't on these special frameworks or that have more than a few thousand pages. So that's why we created Layer Zero. It's a web CDN, an application delivery platform to address the root problems that we talked about earlier and solve these three challenges. And to do so on any website, on any framework, regardless of size and number of pages. And the way we're able to do this is because we address those two root challenges that we talked about earlier. On Layer Zero, we integrate the edge logic into the app so that dynamic data can be cached by the developer and they're able to develop and test against it and have faith in that code when they roll it into production. And then in terms of getting as close to the user as possible, we bundle in predictive prefetching software that turns the browser into an extension of the edge network itself. So let's dive into this in a little more detail and the impact here. So with Layer Zero, I talked about earlier, as a local developer, I've got my server code, I've got my database, I've got my browser code. But before, I didn't have my edge logic. Now with the technology we call Edge.js, I'm able to develop and test the caching of my website locally in development along with all the rest of my components. And then I also have an infinite number of staging environments in the cloud so that I can put it through the same QA and testing process that the rest of my code goes through. So when I roll it out into production, my edge logic goes with it. In fact, it will also roll back if I roll my code back as well. This makes it very easy for developers to test and verify their edge configurations. We also bundle in the right observability you need in terms of real user monitoring, cache hit rate, and Core Web Vitals. So we talked about earlier with Core Web Vitals, it can take days or weeks to understand how your site is behaving and how it's improving. We have built our RUM tool to actually be very specific to how Core Web Vitals works. It shows you those metrics up front and center, has the key metrics you need to triangulate which of your pages are affected by Core Web Vitals, and it will do so in real time. So you will know in minutes rather than days or weeks how you've improved your Core Web Vitals. There's also lots of detail on caching, and we bundle all this observability in a way that's not in terms of arbitrary URLs, but it's tracked in terms of routes, which is how the developer thinks of their application. So if I'm a developer, I think about things in terms of my category page or my product page or my home page. I don't think of it by its individual URL for every single page. All the observability in Layer Zero is reflected back to the user in that kind of form. And as a result, one of the sometimes most surprising benefits to our customers is the improvement in team productivity that they get out of this, because they have this increased confidence on what they're deploying and how they're improving it. And in fact, Layer Zero teams are actually releasing twice as often as the industry baseline. Let's also talk about the predictive prefetching piece. And we have to go back to that model of the CDN we talked about earlier. So again, we have a user request. It hits the browser cache. It goes to the CDN POP. If it's not at the CDN POP, it goes to the server, looks it up in a database, and then it comes all the way back. And for classic CDN, this whole flow, especially if the dynamic content isn't cached and some of the static content is cached, you do this over somewhere between 20 to 100 requests that are on a typical page. that can add up to, load times that are in the range of 3 to 5 seconds. And the best the CDN can do is cache, the static data here, and typically they're not caching the dynamic data. And obviously, as we just talked about on layer 0, we're able to cache the dynamic data here now, but we're also actually able to take this step further. What we're able to do is pull in the data proactively before the user actually even requests it into the browser cache, so that the request flow looks something like this. The request goes to the browser cache, and then that's it. You don't have to go any further. The data is already there. It's almost as if the network has infinite bandwidth and zero latency, because we've basically pulled that static and dynamic content into the cache ahead of the user. And as a result, sites on layer 0 average close to 600 milliseconds in terms of load time. That's literally the blink of an eye. Blink of an eye is somewhere around 300 to 400 milliseconds. So this is blink and you'll miss it. And as a result, our customers have had great improvement in their engagement metrics as well as their revenue, thanks to this ability that caching of dynamic data and predictive prefetching unlock for the speed of their websites. So here, for example, you can see some of the results our customers have had using layer 0 in terms of both their speed as well as their revenue KPIs. So with that, let me just pause. I know I've been talking for a while, and do a quick demo and show you what this is like and make this more concrete as a developer. So here's a website. This is an out-of-the-box template that comes from React Storefront. It's a React e-commerce template for retail websites. I'm just going to reload this. And I've put it on layer 0, and you can see right here, we've already got some debugging and observability tools that are telling you what's happening under the hood in terms of the predictive prefetching and the caching. I can very easily see what's being cached and what's not, whether it's being cached at the browser, at the edge, or it goes up to the cloud server list here, or even to the origin. And as a developer, I can say, click on this, and I can see, oh, that first request that I'm clicking on, it shows up as green. It was actually served from the browser cache, so the predictive prefetching is working properly. And I can see, oh, this API, this other API that the page is using for these suggested products, I'm noticing is red. It's not being cached appropriately. And it'll tell me exactly why. And then as a developer, I can go directly into my application code, into my JavaScript code, and I can start controlling my edge caching right from within my application code. And I'm able to do so using all the same, functions and primitives and logic that I'm used to doing as a developer. I can address my cache programmatically, and I can test it and develop against it locally. In this case, I can see that this route here wasn't being set as cached. I can uncomment this line, which I wrote ahead of time, obviously, and I can call this same caching function that I defined here in this cache methodology. I can hit save. I can try that locally, and then I can deploy it again, and I can see the impact. I can click on this. I can go back and click on that page, and I can see, okay, now both of these are being cached. Now this page is going to load lickety-split very easily, because everything is going to be served as much as possible from the cache. I mentioned earlier that we basically are understanding and showing all the observability data in terms of the application routes. I want to make that more concrete for you. So here, for example, we're showing your cache hit rate. We're telling you which pages have good performance, which ones don't, which ones need improvement. And then we give you observability data in terms of CPU, memory, traffic, and hit rate, not as raw URLs. This is a site that has lots of different URLs. I'm actually specifying them in terms of the application paths, in terms of the application routes, I should say, which is for an e-commerce site, rather than the URL for every product, I just simply know, oh, my product page is behaving this way. This makes it very easy for developers to diagnose and isolate problems and then realizing if they're going to fix them or not. Here's another form of that. We're able to actually look through the code and tell you which pieces of your code are actually caching appropriately. And then finally, we have point and click ability to route traffic and split test and do things like canary deploy. So for example, I can create different versions of my code and I can say split traffic between them. I can isolate traffic based on a query parameter, a header, or a cookie. And the key thing I want to stress here is classically when you do, say, a canary deploy or an A/B test, there's only two ways you can do it. You can do it on the client side in the JavaScript, in which case it's going to be really slow, or you can do it server side, but that means you have to turn off all your caching. And the end result of this is when you do most A/B tests, they turn out to be a wash, because what you've really done is both versions have set back your performance. But with layer 0 and this point and click A/B testing and routing, you're actually getting all of the split testing and routing happening at the edge in edge logic that you don't even have to maintain. And then you can define multiples of these rules and set them live. So that's a really quick whirlwind tour of some of what's available in layer 0. There's obviously a lot more to the platform I'd love to show. If you are, Jamstack or going headless, we have everything you need to go headless. We have, in addition to just API caching, we have GraphQL caching. And then we also have security integrated into the platform. So integrated DDoS, WAF, and bot protection as well. So that's layer 0. And layer 0, and emphasize, is backed by Limelight Networks. This is the second largest CDN on the planet, private global network. And it's trusted by, the largest names in video for over the past 20 years. So we can definitely handle your site and your bandwidth. And we've had customers already get great success, as we talked about earlier, with layer 0 in terms of their conversion rate as well as their revenue. And the last thing I just want to emphasize here is there are multiple ways to integrate layer 0 into your stack. You can keep your existing CDN and use your existing CDN for that static caching that they're already doing, and just add layer 0 for the dynamic caching piece. We've had lots of customers go live with us that way and realize a lot of value. Or if you're ready to buy a whole new CDN, we can take over both your static and dynamic caching needs, as well as the other things you look to for your CDN, such as security as well. So with that, I will stop and see if we've got any questions.
はい、ご視聴いただきありがとうございました。今からですね、Q&A の方に移らせていただきます。少々お待ちください。はい、Q&A ボックスにいただいております質問に、順次回答させていただきます。ご質問につきましては、ライムライト、チームリードソリューションアーキテクトの中村のサポートを入れながらお答えさせていただきます。それでは、質問を、読み上げさせていただきます。まずですね、プリフェッチの機能についてです。これは事前にユーザーのブラウザにコンテンツを読み込むことになるようですが、プリフェッチ機能を実施することにより、ユーザー側への負荷は考慮する必要がありますでしょうか。ラストワンマイルの待機などということです。中村さん、お願いします。
Okay, the first question is about the prefetch. So this function is assuming that it will the content will be read to the user's browser in advance. So when using the prefetch functions, is there any things that we need to consider about the user environment? For example, like last mile bandwidth?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things that need to be considered, but probably actually the biggest one is not on the user end. It's surprisingly on your own servers. If you don't have layer 0 and you do this type of predictive prefetching, you could actually take down your own site. And the way to think about that is if there's 10 items on a category page on an e-commerce site, normally a user might click on 1 or 2, but with prefetching, you're going to basically potentially get 10 of those. So that could be 10 times the amount of traffic. What layer 0 does is we shield you and protect you from that extra traffic, so it does not look like additional traffic that'll take down your origin. On the user side, as a developer, you have full control over what can be prefetched. So you don't prefetch necessarily everything. You might just say, only these important things are the ones to be prefetched. And then another thing we will do automatically is make sure that prefetch traffic does not starve regular user traffic. The main thing you want to make sure you do is that the prefetch traffic doesn't take priority and the user clicks on something and they're waiting because it's busy prefetching stuff. We already take care of that for you so that the user experience doesn't suffer, nor does the server costs on your origin suffer either from this useful technique.
Thanks. そうです。まず、実はそのプリフェッチをご利用いただく際に一番気をつけていただかなければいけないことというのは、ユーザー側ではなくて、実はサーバー側、御社のオリジンの方が、実は一番最初に気をつけていただきたいという点になります。これなぜかというと、レイヤー0以外でですね、こういったソリューションを使おうとした場合に、オリジン側の負荷が上がってしまうという問題がありますと。例えばその商品ページに10個の商品が載っていたとして、ユーザーさんがその中から1つ2つクリックをして中を見ますと言った場合に、そのプリフェッチをさせようとすると、レイヤー0を使わない場合は、その、表示されている10サイト分が全部オリジンにアクセスがいって、配信を受けてしまうという問題があります。で、レイヤー0を使っていただくと、レイヤー0はそのオリジンを保護しながら配信をプリフェッチをさせるという機能がありますので、その、10サイト分、10商品分ですね、のアクセスがあったとしても、オリジンの保護をしながら配信をさせるという仕組みがございます。で、ユーザーに関してなんですけれども、開発者様の方で、そのユーザーさんの挙動に関しては、すべてコントロールができるような開発をされていると思います。なので、例えば必要な商品のデータであったりとか、必要なデータに絞った形でユーザーにあらかじめプリフェッチをさせるというような制御は、実は開発者様の方でできるようになっています。で、レイヤー0としては、組み込んでいる機能としまして、あくまでユーザーの体感を損ねない形でプリフェッチをさせるという仕組みになっております。なので、プリフェッチが重くなっているから、ユーザー体感で本来必要な処理ができなくなるというような処理順序にはなっていないので、そういったような形で、ユーザーサイド、サーバーサイド両方を、保護した形でプリフェッチをご利用いただけるような機能になっております。こちらで回答になっておりましたでしょうか。
はい、ありがとうございます。はい、次の質問が来ておりますので読み上げさせていただきます。フリーランスでお客様のウェブ開発に関わるのですが、すでに別のベンダーの CDN を利用していても、この仕組みは使えるのですか？それともライムライトの CDN が必要ですか？ということです。
Okay, the second question is about the web from the web developers. So, can this layer 0 technology can be used with the existing other vendor, or does they need Limelight CDN and mandatory?
You can use layer 0 with any CDN. We've worked with a lot of the major CDNs, and basically we have multiple ways our team can integrate into an existing CDN. The simple explanation is you continue to use your existing CDN the way you currently do for your static caching, and then the dynamic data gets cached by layer 0 behind that CDN is the most common configuration.
Thanks. ですね。レイヤー0は、ライムライトの CDN だけではなくて、既存、今お使いにいただいている他社様の CDN と合わせた形でのご利用というのも可能になっております。で、レイヤー0としましては、そういった実際の経験ですとか、実装というのをいくつかさせていただいております。で、実装方法もいくつかパターンがあるんですけれども、代表的なものとしましては、そういう、性的なデータに関しては、 既存の CDN をそのままお使いいただいて、動的な部分も高速化させるというところで、レイヤー0を適用していただくというような住み分けをしているという実装が多いです。
はい。ありがとうございます。質問の回答になってますでしょうか。はい、ありがとうございます。もう一つ、質問が来ておりますので、読み上げさせていただきます。Netlify、Whistle、あるいは AWS、Amplify、Cloudflare、Pages といった他の静的サイトホスティングプラットフォームと比べて、レイヤー0はどのような違いがありますか？これらの競合サービスとの比較において、レイヤー0を使うメリットは何でしょうかということです。中村さん、お願いします。
Can you explain about the differentiation and the advantage of using Layer 0 compared to the other static site hosting platform, for example, like Netlify versus AWS, Amplify, Cloudflare Pages, etc.?
Yeah, Layer 0 was specifically built to bring the benefits you typically get with static site hosting, but to make that work for very large sites that have lots of pages or frequent changes where traditional static techniques really don't apply or can't work. So large e-commerce sites, travel and hospitality, what we like to call high stakes websites, where you've got more than 1,000 or more than 10,000 pages. Some of our customers have hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of pages. You cannot statically generate all the pages every time somebody changes a category page. That's not scalable. But you can take the same benefits of these Jamstack platforms and make them work in those environments. That's what we built Layer 0 for. The other key difference is Layer 0 is unique in that it is both a Jamstack hosting platform or static site hosting platform, as well as a CDN, which means we have other CDN features built in like security, DDoS, WAF, that you wouldn't find on some of our other competition.
はい。まずですね、大きく分けて2つございます。で、まずそのレイヤー0というのは、ですね、例えばそのたくさんのページがあったりですとか、非常に変更が多かったりとするような、我々としてはそのハイステーティサイトっていう、その10万ページ、100万ページあるような、そういったサイトの、に適しているというようなプラットフォームになっています。この技術的にその静的サイトホスティングの技術自体はそういったところにも使えるんですけれども、こういったプラットフォームがないというところで、レイヤー0はそういった大きなサイト様に向けてのプラットフォームとしての提供を目指してサービス化をさせていただいております。で、あともう一つですね、レイヤー0は、Jamstack の、ソリューションというだけではなくて、CDN の機能も包括しておりますので、他のものと組み合わせなくても、レイヤー0で、その Jamstack の、プラットフォームと CDN の機能、セキュリティであったりだとか、そういうキャッシングの技術だったりというのをすべて合わせて使っていただくことができるような仕組みになっております。
はい。ありがとうございます。もう一つ、あと2つですね、ございますので、引き続き、続けさせていただきます。既存サイトにヘッドレスウェブサイトの実装を進めるとなったら、どういった移行支援が御社から得られるのでしょうか。実際のところ直近で、この手のナレッジを持つエンジニアを集めるのは難しいので、その観点もご説明いただけますと嬉しいですということです。
For the existing site, what kind of help that can Limelight Layer 0 can offer for the for moving the existing site to headless website? Because it takes it's really difficult to gather the engineers who has this knowledge and experience at this moment.
This is a very good question. You know, being a company that focuses on serving very large sites, we know you can't go from non-headless a traditional maybe jQuery site to a React site all at once, it would be too risky and too scary for the business, especially with a really large site. So one of the things we built early on that Layer Zero can do to help is we have features in the platform that help you seamlessly migrate parts of your site one at a time. In particular, I showed that traffic splitting feature where you can kind of point and click and route traffic. You can use that for actually migrating certain pieces of your site by path to headless and non-headless. Layer Zero is built to handle that. So for the non-headless parts of your site, we can just be a regular CDN. And for the headless pieces of your site, we can be the Jamstack host, and you can kind of piecemeal migrate your site. The other key thing that we have is we have a professional services team of highly skilled engineers who have helped lots of large enterprise companies do this migration, and they can either consult or they can get into the code with you and help you implement as well. And so we have a team that can help folks do that out because it's a consistent ask we hear from large sites that are trying to go headless.
こちらに関しては大きく分けてですね、プラットフォームとしての支援と、そういう、サービスとしてですね、の支援の2種類がございます。まず、プラットフォームとしてなんですけれども、当然ですね、そのサイトを全部一から、今の、例えば jQuery であったり、トラディショナルな、仕組みになっているものからヘッドレスに一気に移行するというのは難しいので、部分的に移行していくという形になっていくかと思います。で、そこで先ほどの、プレゼンテーションでご紹介をしました、その、トラフィックのパターンに応じて、例えばパスに応じて、これは既存のそのトラディショナルなオリジンに行く、これは、ヘッドレスの移行済みの仕組みに行くというような形で振り分けをしていただくことができるような仕組みを持っておりますので、こちらを使ってその段階的に移行をするというような仕組みとして使っていただくことができます。で、もう一つがですね、プロフェッショナルサービスをご用意させていただいております。で、こちらに関しては、実際にその、サイトのそういうコンサルテーションというような入り方もできますし、その開発という実際に手を動かすところの支援という、部分でも、ご支援させていただくことができるようになっております。
はい、ありがとうございます。最後ですね、もう一つだけ質問させていただきます。レイヤー0の導入事例で多くの SKU を扱っている E コマースサイトはありますか？またそういったサイトでどういったヘッドレス CMS が一緒に使われていますかということです。中村さんお願いします。
So, in the Layer Zero use case, can you give us some example of the e-commerce site which has like literally tons and millions of the SKUs, the products, and what kind of like headless CMS are they using for those sites?
It's a good question. If you go to layerzero.co, our homepage, you will see right under on the front page at the top is a list of some customers and the number of pages they have. So an example would be one of our customers, Shoe Carnival, has hundreds of thousands of pages, about 200,000 pages. We have another customer, Sharper Image, that has around 50,000 pages. I think we have another one that has nearly 900,000 pages. So you can see those customers referenced right on our homepage. And then if you go in our menu and you go to resources, customers, there is a list of case studies on our website of select customers that are using Layer Zero. I believe all of those are actually in North America though, but there are those case studies up there on our website.
こちら、ご質問いただいたものに関しては、少し、外部の資料になってしまう部分なんですけれども、弊社のレイヤー0のホームページですね、https://layer0.co のページを開いていただきますとですね、ページのすぐ下のところに、弊社が事例としてお客様からご許可いただいております、企業様と、それぞれの企業様が何ページぐらいのですね、サイトかというのを、実際に表示をさせていただいておりまして、多いものですと、990万ページぐらいあるような、情報という形でお出しをさせていただいております。で、それぞれの、事例に関しては、その上の ページの上にありますメニューのリソーシズのカスタマーから参照していただくことができますので、ちょっとこちらの方を見ていただければと思います。
はい。どうもありがとうございました。そろそろお時間になりましたので、質疑応答はこちらにて終了させていただきます。たくさんのご質問をいただきまして、どうもありがとうございました。はい。ウェビナーの終了時にですね、ブラウザでアンケートが表示されますので、本日のウェビナーのご感想や新たなご質問がありましたら、こちらにご記入いただけますようお願いいたします。アンケートにお答えいただきました方には、後日こちらを収録したビデオをですね、お送りさせていただきますので、何卒ご協力いただきますようお願いいたします。はい、本日はお忙しい中、ライムライトネットワークスのウェビナーにご参加いただきまして、誠にありがとうございました。イシャン、do you have a last word?
Thank you very much. And if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out and happy to answer them.
はい、Thank you. はい、ということですので、何かご質問がありましたらご遠慮なさらず、ご連絡くださいますようお願いいたします。これにて、本日のウェビナーを終了させていただきます。お忙しい中、ご参加いただきましてどうもありがとうございました。こちらにて失礼いたします。